Hello everyone, I'm Michele, and in this talk I'm going to introduce you to our study on attacker preferences that we derived from the observation of supply and demand in a prominent underground market for user impersonation at scale. From our investigation on underground marketplaces, we identified Genesis market. Maybe some of you saw this market before. In prior work, we studied how the market works from its operations to derive the underlying threat model that the market operates on. And we call the threat model impersonation as a service. And what Genesis offers to its customers are bundles of stolen information that contain stolen credentials, cookies, and a number of metadata that describes a browser, so basically builds a fingerprint of a browser. And this is quite useful to bypass risk-based authentication. It is quite interesting as a product, this one, because it is a cheap and very good alternative to sophisticated attacks that one attacker could do to a target, and is an alternative to have an initial access to an enterprise, for example. It emerges that it is a mature threat and on a global scale. But however, we still have some gaps open here. We still wonder how big is this threat, what is the revenue of the market, and most importantly, what are the preferences of the attackers? Meaning that what are the kind of users that are going to be targeted the most from this market and from the customers that go into this market. And this is a very rare opportunity that we have in this ecosystem to study exactly supply and demand of products in a market. And we can use this information to estimate attacker preferences and its market size. Of course, extracting data from live markets is quite a complicated activity. One of them is that the market is a restricted access. You need an invite code to get access to this market. So we had to infiltrate in an affiliated community, create some identities in there, pretend to be like people interested in the activity of the market. To obtain some invite codes, we managed to obtain 6, and with those, we use them for our crawlers. And of course, we discovered also that there were some anti-crawler mechanisms. So we had to figure out a trade-off between data completeness and stealth, because we don't want to be banned and reiterate again the infiltration process once more. So we solved that by using browser instrumentation, so looking like a legitimate user, throttling traffic, sampling every 24 hours, and by splitting the tasks among the 6 crawlers we had. More into the next slide. And another problem is that extracting this kind of data is complicated because data gets censored very easily because of connectivity issues. So sometimes Tor network is congested, other times the market was completely down. So the crawler had to retry to crawl again under certain circumstances. We had the possibility to collect also some summary data from the market, so we could have an idea of what was going on in the days that we couldn't get data from. And we conducted some robust statistical evaluation to evaluate and recreate the missing data, including also me waking up in the night to see if the crawler was working and manually restarting it. Come on, I won't sleep. And another challenge was to deal with the high dimensionality of the data and the noise in the data. So we aggregated the effects by using dimensionality reduction techniques, and we perform a sale prediction model that accounts also for the random effect introduced from the availability of the supply for each day. So this is an overview of what we did. Don't be afraid, let's break it down. So the data collection. We collected data from the 21st of January to the 30th of June 2021 for a total of 161 days. We had 3 crawlers that were tasked to sample the 25% of all the appeared profiles in the last 24 hours of the market, so we checked the supply. Another 3 crawlers were monitoring this supply for over the following 6 days to see what profiles are still there and which not. If a profile is still there, it was not sold, and vice versa. So we managed to obtain complete information about 107 days for a total of more than 12,000 profiles with detailed information. We enriched also this data, adding information about the GDP per capita based on the country of origin, and we classify also the available credentials in the stolen profile. Then we perform multiple factor analysis to perform a dimensionality reduction. And basically, we obtain these dimensions that you can imagine them being as classes of profiles with similar characteristics. You will see more in the next slide. And then we had to decide also how much data in time we had to consider. We decided to stop only to the first day because we saw that the majority of sales were happening in the first day. But most importantly, we could reuse almost all the data that we captured. Then we create a sale prediction model that, as I said before, accounting for the random effect of the daily supply. And we predict sales for the remaining days. And then we recreate the remaining part of the market we could not gather with a batch of Monte Carlo simulations. So we recreate the 54 missing days. And yeah, finally now we have all the market data, and we can finally study attacker purchasing decisions, the scale of the threat, market revenues, and we contextualize basically our findings in relation with the broader risk model proposed by Woods and Bohms. And what we learned is that rich nations are mostly targeted, especially EU. We see that more than 60% of the supply originates from the EU, roughly 12% from North America. And we see that supply almost matches demand for a profile originated from North America and Oceania. So there is a strong preference for those profiles. And when looking at the transformed data, recall what I said before, dimensions are basically classes of profiles that share common characteristics between them. What we see, for example, for dimension 8, just to give you an example, profiles originating from richer countries tend to be more rich in cookies originated from Chrome, are more likely to be sold. This is the model. The positive coefficient says that those profiles are more likely to be sold, while conversely, profiles that originate from poorer countries having older OSs are less likely to be sold. What I want to stress also about this plot is that just considering just the wealth of the country where the profile originates is not enough. You can see there are many factors playing a role in the decision-making of the attacker. So it is really hard to disentangle the single effects. There are many factors in there. By looking at the scale of the threat globally, we see that, again, first world regions are the main targets, and profiles originating from Oceania and North America are the most pricey. Europe follows. As it is quite a custom for Russian markets, Russia and other ex-URSS countries are not included. And when looking at supply and demand of profiles in the market, we see that on average we have 600 profiles being listed every day, peaking in 3,800s. Sales peak to 430 profiles per day. So on average, it's 125 profiles being sold per day. And we estimate that that daily revenues for the market range between $3,000 and $4,000. Peaking to between $7,000 and $16,000. And we estimate that the yearly revenues for the market are around $1.2 and $1.6 million. So to put it into the wider context, we look at how the threat is generated. Yeah, we look at how the threat is generated, and we have to consider that basically threats are not generated out of thin air. They are the result, the effect of an action from an attacker. There are some thoughts, there are some decisions that the attacker makes. So we decide to break down what are the factors that influence the decisions of the attackers when choosing their victims. So we instantiated basically this risk model in relation to the threat we studied to look at what are the purchasing decisions of the attackers. And we see that they are mostly influenced from the expected wealth, unsurprisingly, probably, and the technical details of the offered profile. Because of course attackers want to know if the attack technology they are going to buy is going to be effective or not. And putting our findings into a risk model allows also stakeholders to monitor market activity, to evaluate the exposure. So from the market, you can look up if there is any profile that contains credentials for any of your websites or infrastructure, for example. and stakeholders could better prepare also for attacks by rebooking credentials, mandating two-factor authentication for a week, or informing the relevant SOC. So yeah, this is an example of how important it is to understand how attackers choose their victims to better protect the end users. In conclusions, all stories have an end. This April, the market has been taken down from a huge joint law enforcement operation. Unfortunately, the market managed to go back in operations after 10 days or so, and the supply started again to flow into the market. But then after a month, they decided they want to retire. So they published on a couple of communities that their intention to sell all the market together with infrastructure, the software, all their know-how. So the market was sold after a week, allegedly. We don't know to whom and for how much. But yeah, even though the brand of the market was broken, there was still interest from someone. And looking also, I mean, our findings, but also checking at the warrant from the FBI, we see that the market in more than 4 years of activity targeted more than 2 million people across the world and grossed more than $6 million. So our findings are also quite in line with that. So it is a lucrative business model. This thing works. This solves the problem of using stealer logs that criminals find around. And so yeah, I strongly believe that this kind of market, we're going to see something like that in the near future. Yeah, that's it. I'm ready to take questions.